In this week's episode of the Rockfit Files, I'm changing the pace a little bit. Instead of having a guest on, I'm going to actually play the recording of a presentation I recently made about bulletproofing the lower back. So if you've got issues in the tissues and you want to live a life without pain, or at least less, then you might want to listen along.
I have a facility here in Santa Cruz, California. Some of you are familiar with it, of course. I recognize some names on there, and others, maybe you're just new to our meetup group. Well, nonetheless, welcome. We're going to be dealing with the lower back today. And we call it bulletproofing the lower back because we want to create some strategies on how to protect the lower back. And it's interesting that so many people, in fact, 80% of adults, and maybe even more now in the youth community, but 80% of Americans will be encountering some form of low back pain sometime in their life. Fortunately for some, it'll just be a very small experience and they'll never experience it again. And others are dealing with chronic or acute issues in their lower back. And most likely several people in the audience can say, yes, I've experienced that too, because that's why you're here. But it's interesting, why is it the lower back? What are we just structurally mismatched and we just don't have the right framework? Well, no, not really. But the lifestyle in which we're living in this culture that has plenty of technology and labor-saving and time-saving devices is really one of the main culprits here, is that we're no longer the hunters and gatherers. We're not going out on the plains foraging for food. We actually, in order to survive, have to come up with this little piece of paper we take to the bank. And in order to get that little piece of paper every week or 2 weeks, we often need to just sit in one location or stand in one location for prolonged periods of time. And our bodies were meant to go out and forage for food and be out there being the nomadic tribes people. There's one more person coming in right now. There you go. So we have taken our lifestyle and we've changed it dramatically in the last couple of centuries, and now we're seeing the effects of it. In fact, this position that we're in right now, most of us live in wheelchairs, some of us not by choice, and others by necessity. And what I mean by that is, if you have an automobile, that is a wheelchair. If you have a bicycle, that's a wheelchair, although you're a little bit more active in it. And if you work in an office and you've got wheels on your chair, you're in a wheelchair. Now, I'm not going to break out the calculator and make us all feel horrible, but if we were to add up the hours of a day where you're living in a wheelchair, whether it's driving, commuting back and forth to work, or you happen to have a career where you're a truck driver or something like that, an Uber driver, taxi driver, whatever, your job is to put you in a wheelchair. And then if you're an office worker, same thing, dental hygienist, I mean, even more so, especially if you're huddled in a certain position all through the day. And maybe you're a barista at Starbucks. Well, yeah, I walk around Starbucks a little bit behind the counter, but there's only so much room you can move. So you're really confined inside of a cage, more or less. You're a zoo exhibit to some degree. And these pent up positions, these environments, are what the body is adapting to the more we're in it. And we're going to find out that we are in those environments more than we are out of those environments. And not to disclude or exclude sleeping, but we're sleeping anywhere between maybe 5 to 8 or 9 hours a day out of 24. And maybe if we're lucky, we get 4 out of the 24 hours to be actually active. Maybe you're a cyclist, maybe you're a runner, maybe the fact that you actually have to supplement some type of physical activity so that your body doesn't break down further, hence these gyms and studios, that's the reason why these are all here, to slow down the decrepitude, the descent into the maelstrom, so to speak. So what we're going to try and do, we're going to look at the human form first, get an understanding of why potentially we may have trouble in the lower back. And then we're going to troubleshoot. We're going to assess different kind of movements in your body and find out, what do you struggle to achieve? Because maybe by struggling to achieve movement here, it asks somewhere else to make up for it. And oftentimes it can be that lower back. And you do it often enough, you create a pattern of movement. And that pattern is reinforced over and over until there becomes some wear patterns in certain areas. Maybe you've been told you have degenerative disc disease or spondylolisthesis or any of those other maladies. These are often forms of repetitive stress and improper patterns of movement. So we're going to try and clean up your movements and try and free up areas so that the back doesn't feel like it's alone in the world and having to do everyone's jobs. Because if you're in a work environment and you're maybe the HR director, you're never going to get visited by the slacker. You're always going to get visited by the person that feels they're overwhelmed and overworked and stressed out. And that is the lower back, and often is the case. So we're going to look for the slackers in your workforce, find out what isn't moving, what isn't doing their job, so that the HR department of the lower back doesn't get the complaints like they normally do. So let's do this. I'm just going to give you a simple kind of rudimentary understanding of proper posture. Now, none of us, I defy anybody to find anyone with perfect symmetrical balanced posture, partly because, well, we're not. We've got a heart with a 2-lobe lung compared to a 3-lobe lung on this side. If you looked at the shape of your rib cage, one side is pushing out a little bit more than the other. It's not symmetrical. I've got one stomach, one spleen, and so on. Aside from my organs being asymmetrical, the way that my bones grow in terms of their rate of length, that's not quite uniform. So maybe this thigh is going to grow a millimeter faster than this thigh, and pretty soon, hopefully, everything kind of levels off, but it's not always the case. So if we think about the part of our body that touches the ground on a regular basis, it's going to be our foot. Now, the foot itself, we should have 3 points of contact to create a tripod, just like the Great Pyramids of Egypt. Structure is all about triangles. And if we have the proper position and weight distribution down into our feet, then the foot shape is going to be proper. So do I have pressure under the middle of my heel, the ball of my foot before my big toe, and the ball of my foot before the pinky toe, the little toe? Those are my 3 legs of my tripod. However, how the weight is distributed above that body may change the shape of your foot. For instance, if you just want to stand up for a moment and with your shoes off, kind of get a sense first of where is your body weight as it relates down into your feet. Let's just do a little check-in. This is our first form of assessing. So as you're standing there with your feet touching the ground, I want you to home in on where do you feel the pressure in your feet. For instance, if you had 2 bathroom scales, one under the left foot, one under the right foot, and you look down at those scales, would those numbers be identical? Might you see a different number on one compared to the other? Do you have more mass of your body over one foot than the other? Now, if we were to just consider that, we might find that the body is shifting a little bit over one leg. And when it shifts, the change of the arches in the feet change. The shape changes. Where the pressure is in your feet changes. That changes the joint positions, which I'll get to in a moment. But just how we manage the mass of all these segments of our body will greatly affect the entire body, not just the feet. Now, homing in on those feet once more, maybe you might feel not only there's a little difference left to right, but if you focused on your right foot just for a moment, do you feel as if there's more of your pressure in the front of your feet toward the ball or to the toes? Or do you feel as if there's a little bit more toward the heel? Wherever that may be, is it more toward the inside sole or toward the outside edge of the foot? Just get a sense of that, because what I'd like to do is at the end of this, after we go through other assessments and movements, we're going to do a check-in. Back to the feet. Go to the left foot. Do you feel as if the same exact pressure is where it was on the right foot as it is on the left? Or is it different? Do you feel more pressure toward the ball of the foot, the toes on the left side? Or do you feel it more in the heels? Do you feel it more toward the insole or the outsole? Now, just by doing that, by just homing in on where you feel the pressure of your feet, in terms of your body weight, that tells us a lot about what might be going on with where your body is shifting in space. If you feel more weight in the front of your right foot, but in the heel of your left foot, that gives us a sense that there may be some torsion or rotation to the left. If you feel more pressure in the front of your left foot compared to the heel, and more pressure in the right heel, left forefoot, right rear foot, that may give you an understanding that, oh, maybe I'm turning a little bit to the right somehow. Now, with that, certain muscles have to lengthen while other ones shorten. So we can kind of map out what's going on with the rest of your body just by getting a sense of where the foot pressure is. Okay. So we've talked about how the feet can react to the body, but same reverses around where the feet can dictate where the body goes. So with the body, we obviously want to be as level as possible. The left foot and the right foot want to have the same shape and the same arches, which position the ankles right where they should be. If you collapse one arch inward, that sends the ankle inward. If you stay on the outside edge of your feet, it drives the ankle outward. That causes rotation into your legs, which causes rotation into your pelvis, and so on. So the foot shape can dictate the posture. Now, when it comes to posture, we want to see that the pelvis is nice and level, the shoulders are level, the knees are level, one's not higher than the other, one's not bending more than the other. Everything wants to be as balanced as possible. Kind of like these foam rollers I have. If I were to just take this as my lower body segment and then put the next roll on top, as long as I line it up straight above this roll, then the weight of that roll will go right down through the center of the other one, and it'll be very stable. And maybe I'll take another one and put it right up here and make sure that's nice and level and fairly straight. And then we'll take our head, and the head is about 10 pounds of weight, and I'm going to put that right on top. And provided that we have a very good alignment of all the load-bearing structure of our body, we can see that this structure is going to be there quite a long time. That means that half of the weight of this is balanced to the left and half to the right. Half of it forward, half of it back. And if we were to make imaginary lines kind of intersecting these kind of balance points or these lines of symmetry, we would come to this point where they intersect right in front of the fourth lumbar vertebrae, which is part of your lower back. You've got 5 bony structures called vertebrae that make up the lower back, and they are the lumbars. So lumbar 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and they sit upon your sacrum or your tailbone, which is fixed to your pelvis. Wherever your pelvis moves, that moves the sacrum. And then you've got this stack, like so, of these segments trying to balance the weight of this head and teetering shoulders on top of this one balance point. Now, if we were to simply get one shoulder higher than the other, or one little head tilt, that's going to directly affect where that line or that center of mass is that normally hovers around your L4. So when we get off balance, your center of mass moves away from its proper place. So is it any wonder that when we get out of alignment, we're going to have lower back problems, because that's the hub of the wheel. So imagine a bicycle wheel has all these spokes, and those spokes come down and they attach to that center hub. And all the spokes have a balance of tension, and that keeps the circle in this perfect shape for a very smooth ride along the road. What would happen if one of those spokes were to just suddenly get tweaked and tighten up or shorten or get relaxed? Then the balance of those spokes would all be compromised. Some would take on just a little bit more, some a little bit less, and that hub would be pulled away from its true place. That's why cyclists want to true up their spokes to create that perfect circle, because when that hub gets moved off of center, the whole shape of the wheel is affected. And then the entire ride is affected because you have a warped wheel. So we're going to look at your spokes, essentially. We're going to look at your wheel. And we're going to see what's going on with your body. So you've already assessed where your foot pressure is. And you may want to make a mental note or write it down as to where you felt that. Because next what we're going to do is we're just going to go through a few movements to find out how your hips move. Because remember, your spine sits on top of this waiter's tray, and your spine is a stack of glasses on top of that waiter's tray that's constantly trying to balance the weight above. So if that tray is tilted too far in one direction or turning or whatever it's doing, it's going to present a lot more work for the muscles to keep that stack of cups from falling to the ground. And that's essentially what goes on with your muscles. There are these guy wires that are constantly lengthening and shortening to control the position of your body in its fight against gravity. And the more you stay in one position, the more that's reinforced. And that's why that sitting and standing in place for too long a period of time is really detrimental to so many people. So let's look at the hips to start off with. And not so much the hip joint, but the pelvic structure, your pelvis, that is that bony structure where the thigh bones come up and meet and they turn into hips. So with your pelvis, what is it like to tilt your pelvis forward and to tilt it backwards? As you tilt it forward, come up with some adjectives. Be descriptive. Does it feel crunchy? Does it feel smooth? Does it feel ratchety? Or do you just drop into it? Or do you have a hard time even figuring out how to create that movement? Is it foreign? Is it natural? And when you tilt it in the opposite direction, in essence, having the tailbone kind of tucked down toward the ground, pulling the backside downward, what does that feel like? Chances are some of you just gravitate toward one position or the other. Very few people have a fairly level pelvis. You're either tilted a little bit forward, which would typically send your upper body forward, unless you contract the muscles in your lower back to bring your rib cage back up over your feet. Meanwhile, there's some others who have this kind of posture, and sadly enough, you're missing your backside. It's kind of disappeared behind you, but that would send your upper body this way unless you pulled your rib cage forward. And you see this a lot in retirement homes in Miami, right? So we've got maybe a lady that's expecting a child, or a guy that's had too many Budweisers on the weekends, get this kind of typical behavior with the stretched out midsection and the tight lower back. And then you've got the other ones that are getting ready to go and turn in their life insurance policy, right? So somewhere along the line, most likely you're in that spectrum, not all the way to one end or the other. But it's good to know, where do you sit? One position may have felt really nice compared to the other. Now, if it bothered your lower back, what that's also telling you is that your lower back is trying to do the movement in place of your pelvis, most likely, and that compensatory pattern we want to try and minimize. So we're going to do something about that. So just making a mental note, what is that like to move your pelvis? And how does it affect your back? Okay, the other assessment I would like you to try is allowing your pelvis to glide off to one side and off to the other. And imagine that it is like perhaps your kid's skateboard that is just going across the ground. It's not tilting on one side. It's not tilting on the other side. It's just simply gliding off to one side and then the other. Are you able to do this and keep your head still? So it's just the lower body swaying back and forth. Does it feel easier to go in one direction compared to the other? Now, these are probably going to be very subtleties that you're going to bring some awareness to. Some may feel very obvious, while other ones you have to try and explore. But if I am constantly living over one leg, it may be that I have a hard time going deeper into that side. Or when I go in the opposite direction, I really feel a stretch over here. But just get a sense, how do I move my pelvis? Side to side. And then coming back to a more neutral position, what is it like to tilt the pelvis sideways? And how you do that is just by bending into one knee, such as like bending into your right knee and feeling that hip drop down. And then coming back up again, keeping that leg straight and bending into the opposite knee and feeling that hip drop down. can you allow one hip to drop while the other one hikes up? Do you struggle with one or both of these? And then lastly, what is it like to turn the pelvis to the left and to the right? So keeping your upper body still with your belly button in your center, can you turn your belly button to one direction? And then can you turn it to the other direction? As you do this, is there one direction that you feel like you can access more? And also, as you do this rotation with the hips, keeping the upper body and head still, how do you create the rotation? Is it by pulling one hip back, or is it by driving the other hip forward? And when you go to the opposite side, how do you do that? Is it by drawing one hip back or driving the opposite hip forward? Is it a combination of both? Some of you are going to go, son of a gun, I am only using one side of my body to create the rotation. What does that mean? What's happening with the other side? Could we wake up that other side so it participates and makes a more balanced place? Now, the reason why we did these movements for the pelvis is because that's the kind of movement that should occur every time you take a step. Every time you go for a walk or a jog, the pelvis needs to tilt forward and backwards in gait. It needs to sweep over to one foot, then the other. It's got to tilt and stop to one side, tilt and stop to the other. And of course, as the legs swing forward and backwards, the pelvis creates this rotation. So this is three-dimensional pelvic motion that you've just assessed. And if you found that you struggled in any of these four movements, chances are somewhere else is going to have to make up for it. And again, it could be that lower back. All right. So you got a sense of that. And out of curiosity, let's just reassess your foot pressure, because you don't think you've really done anything. However, by moving your skeletal structure in the ways that you did, we woke up certain muscles, encouraging them to lengthen and shorten. And we kind of breathed some life back into tissue. So check in with your foot pressure once again. Do you feel as if when you look down on those two bathroom scales, that the numbers are the same as when we started? Are they different? Are they even greater discrepancy, or is there less? All I'm really interested in is if there was a change that took place. Because if we can break out of the feedback loop of the movement patterns that are creating the low back pain and give you a movement pattern that is different, I'm not really all concerned about getting you back to a balanced body right away, just out of the patterns that you're creating currently. So put attention to your right foot. Is there more pressure toward the forefoot or toward the rear foot? Is it toward the inner sole or the outside edge? Do the same thing for the left foot. Is it in the forefoot or the heel? Inside edge, outside edge? Has it changed? And some of you may find that it has changed. And so what I would say there is that the assessments that we just did are actually wonderful restorative tools and movements to re-educate your body, to free up the pelvis, to free up the hips, to encourage the feet to communicate with the hips, to encourage the spine to respond with what the hips were doing, to basically re-educate movement through your whole body. Okay. Let's go back a few steps to somebody who might be very symptomatic, whose back is constantly bothering them. What are a couple things that they could do? For the most part, not everyone's going to benefit from this, but the majority of people will be benefiting. We got somebody coming in right now. All right. Well, let's just say that that lower back is that overworked employee who is taking up the slack. Maybe it's this fellow right here. And let's just say, for the sake of it, that they went skiing on a weekend that they got off. And when they were skiing, because they were not really conditioned for skiing, the snow just fell, they've been sitting for the fall and winter months in an office setting, sitting, their hips are kind of locked up, but they want to go enjoy the ski slopes with their friends. They go down the slope, and on one of the last runs of the day, they take a spill and they wrench their knee, something awful. Well, that person may very well want to start bending that knee to get a little bit of pressure off it. And they may start pushing down on the front of their foot and they'll start limping around on there. They may actually start to lean off and try and position themselves a little bit more over the leg that's not injured. And then they're going to have to kind of correct their head position. And with that knee bending, it may rotate the pelvis in one direction. So they're going to have to make up for it by rotating the rib cage in the opposite direction. And they're going to have to kind of just balance out their torso so that they stay over the leg that's not injured. Now, where would you say this person might be in pain? Granted, the knee, right? But then they create this pattern of movement and the knee starts feeling better and they start kind of limping a little bit less, but they don't do any type of rehabilitative process. The swelling goes down, they go back to work, but this is the structure they go back to work with. And now they've got to be sitting with their hips rotated this way, their ribs rotated this way, their head rotated and tilted this way. Could they start getting migraines or headaches? Could they be having a shoulder problem or upper back problem? Maybe their lower back is kicking in. Maybe they've got some hip or groin issues because this is not opening up. You see, we could chase the symptoms, but we got to look at the problem. Maybe if we started to remind this knee of how it's supposed to behave and load weight back onto it in a safe pattern, that all the other things start to clean up once again. So this is not an atypical scenario. It's actually something that happens quite often, whether it's a sprained ankle, a broken wrist, a rotator cuff problem. All these things can come into play. But let's go back to that person who's got a lot of issue in the tissue in that lower back and it just won't relax. Do you want to be my model? Would you mind? That'd be wonderful. Thank you. All right. Dana's going to come down and lay on the floor here for me. Surprised her. She didn't know she was going to do this. Sorry about that. There you go. And what I've done is I've placed an object like a chair. In this case, it's one of our boxes that we have in the studio. That's something that's about the right height so that her knees can be, for the most part, over her hips. And I might just push that in just a little bit more. Yeah. And her lower legs, I might just get another cushion so that I can make sure that there you go, that her ankles and knees are pretty much parallel. So as you can see here, just like this building, we have a very level foundation. The walls meet that floor at a right angle. The upper floor meets the upper wall at a right angle. And as long as we maintain all these right angle positions, this building will be structurally sound and be here for a very long time. The same holds true with our bodies. The closer we can get to level right angle positions for our joints, the better position they'll be in, the more balanced the muscle tension will be, and the easier the weight of our body will be to support it through our skeletal structure. So by having her lie down on a level surface such as the floor, I've got her head realigning with her spine. So some of the muscles that are really tight in her lower back don't have to be so contracted, and they're beginning to relax. And that lower back that was barely touching the ground is now settling in and relaxing. So already she's adapting to this environment, just in the same way we adapt to that work environment of sitting or standing. We're doing this in her favor now. The knees are over the hips and the weight of her legs is being supported by this box. The weight of her body is supported by the floor. And we have all these right angles occurring while the body can just relax. So if you're a person who gets a chronic or acute or chronic issues in the lower back, this may be a wonderful place to just be for a little while, a reprieve, if you will, so that the muscles that are being neurologically bombarded to do more and more work, this is like that overworked employee. You just gave them a 7-day vacation just on the company, going, hey, go relax, take a little siesta, come back when you're feeling better. Because that's what this is. We call it a static or a neutral back. Now, while in this position, we can start to slowly kind of boot her system back up again. Because computers were actually designed by how the human brain is designed. So we're going to use that terminology here. We've just basically put her in sleep mode or shutdown. And now we're going to boot up her systems a little bit and get her more online. While in this position, a great thing might be to just relax and work on breathing and breathing into the tummy, into the chest, and just being relaxed. By taking slow, deep breaths, it actually sends a signal up to your brain that there are no saber-toothed tigers chasing you. Your tax bills are not due in the next hour. There's no stress. Breathing deep triggers a reflexive response within the brain that allows muscles to relax. So meditative process would be a wonderful thing to do. So while you're there, we're going to start to wake up the muscles that stabilize or support the hips and the pelvis. Remembering that the pelvis is that waiter's tray that supports the spine. So if we've got the pelvis in the proper position, just maybe that back will feel better. So I'm going to get a ball. And in this case, it's an old volleyball, and we've taken a little air out of it. So it's a little bit cushy, somewhat flat. Doesn't bounce very well. At home, a couch cushion or a pillow folded in half. Something that's maybe 7 inches or so in diameter. I'm going to place it right in between her knees. And I'm going to encourage her to just squeeze that object between her knees and hold it for that contraction for maybe 1 second, and then relax. And again, squeezing and relaxing. Now, as she's doing this, the knees are going toward each other. And therefore, if it's a stiff bone of the femur, the thigh bone, when this goes in, the end goes out. So it's creating space around the sacrum or the tailbone. It's opening up the lower back a little bit. And at the same time, you're probably feeling muscles on the inside of your thighs toward the groin. If you feel your lower back when you're doing this, it's because the lower back still doesn't know it should be on vacation and it's trying to do the work of everybody on the crew. So don't squeeze that hard. Just do it a little gentler so that you don't overwhelm the inner thighs and you get them to participate. Otherwise, you overwhelm the inner thighs. They say, I can't handle the pressure. Send it to upstairs to the lower back, and the lower back starts just kicking in again and again. So beware of that. So with these squeezing of the knees, we might start with about 10 or 15, and over time we might build up for more. But that's about it. Then another one we could do in this position would be to simply take one ankle and we're going to cross it right over the top of the knee. Again, the box is still here to support the weight of the body and the weight of the leg. So we're going to use that for right now. Over time, as the back improves its ability to feel good and the hips improve their ability to open up, I may encourage her to lift her leg off the box so that it becomes more active. But for right now, this is a very passive way of just trying to relax and open up the tension in hips that are not moving the way we want them to. After about a minute, I'm going to switch legs, and we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Now, if you're going along with me and you're doing this, you may very well notice that one hip feels incredibly different than the other hip. And what you've just discovered is you've got a little imbalance going on between the muscles on one side versus the other. And imagine those muscles, they attach to bones, or they attach to tendons, which attach to bones. And if certain muscles have more tensile force just at rest than their counterpart, can you imagine what that's doing to your skeletal system, your frame? So where the bones attach to the tendons attach to the bones, they're pulling on your skeletal frame in one direction more than the other. So wouldn't it be nice if we created a better balance? When doing this particular movement, if you notice that one side is more restricted than the other, you might want to do that a few more times on that side because it might need a little bit more attention than the side that doesn't feel as much. All right. So then, the next thing we'll do is I'm going to just have you bring your knees to your chest, and we're going to move the box away so you can bring your feet flat on the ground. Wonderful. We're going to bring the arms out away from your body, and you're simply going to cross one ankle over the opposite knee. Great. With this ankle crossed over the knee, The other foot is going to stay on the floor. And that foot there is going to be like a hinge on a door frame. It can pivot. It just can't slide or lift or move off its position, but it can pivot over in my direction because we're going to take the foot and that leg and carefully bring it all the way down to the floor. The leg that's on the ground is going to relax as much as possible, while the knee that's right here off the floor is going to be encouraged to point toward the ceiling like it is right now. Now, as you do this, you may find that you're really quite restricted in your ability to rotate over and bring this leg all the way to the floor. So we may want to get a pillow or some object where you can put it over here and be able to bring the leg down and rest on that until there comes a time where you've relaxed enough, the muscles have opened enough, where we can get a smaller object and the smaller object, and over time, you'll eventually get down where you won't need it anymore and you'll be relaxed to the floor. So keeping the ankle crossed over the knee, tightening up the tummy, and pushing into the arms are going to rotate back up. We're going to switch legs, and we're going to just explore what it's like on the other side. So rotating over, beautiful. Relaxing the leg that's on the ground as much as you can, encouraging this knee to point up to the ceiling. And this should feel really nice for the majority of people doing this. What we've just done is we have trued up the spokes that surround the pelvis. You have 57 muscles that cross the pelvis, 45 of which go down and attach to your legs, 12 of which that go upward and attach to the spine, the ribs, a couple to the arms. And all of those spokes that surround the pelvis need to have a little bit of balance in order to keep the pelvis in a nice spot. All right, you can bring yourself on up. Thank you so much for playing along. I appreciate that. That's all I wanted to see. So for those of you that did follow along with this, let's just check in once again. Coming up to your feet, get a sense of where is it do I feel not only the weight in my feet, but what does your back feel like after that? Now, there's a few others that I'm going to go through, but for right now, I just want to get a sense of, did that help? Now, granted, everyone's lived individual lives, and therefore how your body has responded to all those individual events is going to be quite different from the person standing beside you or on the screen beside you. Therefore, what we just did may not be appropriate for every single person. It was more of a shotgun blast to hopefully give the majority of people something to work with. But there are going to be people who are going, no, that doesn't help. And that's simply because those movements may not be the appropriate ones for you based on where your body is and where your structure is. All right, let's do a few more. And what we're going to try and do is just continue to open up around the hips. And then we'll open up the lower legs. And then we'll try and wake up some muscles that should be supporting you. So I'm going to use this box, and you could use a chair at home. I'm just going to, or a footstool even better. I'm going to get a pad so you can see it a little bit better on the floor here. And with this box, I'm going to be facing the opposite direction, and I'm going to put one foot, the roof of my foot, on the top of that box. And the pillow is going to be for my knee. The other foot is going to come forward. And if you're struggling with your balance, having a chair nearby may not be a bad idea. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that chair on the side of the forward leg. You'll see that my forward leg here is a right angle. We're trying to recreate right angles. And my hips are going to be directly above the knee that's on the cushion. My head and shoulders will be stacked on top of the hips. And when I do that, several of you may encounter a significant stretch down the front side of that thigh on the knee that's down on the ground. Now in this position, we're going to try and level off the pelvis, meaning the belt loops in the front of your pants, you're going to encourage them to lift up slightly, almost tucking the tailbone downward. And in so doing, you'll probably feel a greater degree of a lengthening sensation on the muscles in the front of that thigh. While in this position, taking the hand on the same side as the knee that's down, in this case, it's my left knee that's on the cushion, so my left arm is going to be reaching upward. And I'm just going to lift my arm up and then come on back down again. Lifting up and back down. And with each lift, I'm not just lifting my arm, but I'm lifting my shoulder. I'm lifting my shoulder blade. I'm encouraging my ribs to lift off of this hip and create space all through my midsection there. After that, let's switch legs and do the same thing to the other side. So my right foot is going to be on the box. Right knee is on the cushion. Forward leg is at a nice right angle with this knee directly underneath me. I'm going to level off my pelvis by lifting the loops in my waistband in front, giving me a nice stretch sensation here. With my right knee down, my right arm is going to reach upward and then lower back down. And as you do this, continue on for a few more. How does that side feel compared to the other side? Do you notice that one is significantly different? That is, it's significantly more restricted. Now, we're not going to try and muscle through this. This is an encouragement, an invitation for those muscles to experience an openness. If you force it, it's going to overwhelm it, and your lower back is going to start talking. So it's a very subtle thing, and maybe even more subtle than you think you should. If you feel your lower back, try to soften it a little bit. Try to soften the reach. Just see what it's like to just hold that position. And then once you're done with both sides, come on up and walk around a little bit. See what that feels like. How's that lower back? Now, I know some of you are saying, well, he's just showing us a whole bunch of stretches. Well, that's not true. A couple of them work. That rotating over to the side that Dana was doing on the floor with her ankle crossed over her knee, that was a stretch. It was just an opportunity for muscles to relax and open up. But what you just did here was you were teaching your muscles how to properly be under load while in a different state. Not being always contracted, but how do I work when my muscles are longer? So it's called loading lengthened tissue. And it's a different kind of form. Now, it may feel like a stretch sensation, but it's actually much more than that. It's a neuromuscular re-education of what your brain is telling your muscles. So hopefully that's feeling a little bit better. I've got just a few more that you can play around with. And provided that these are giving you a beneficial effect and they're feeling quite nice, then wouldn't it be nice to make this a regular discipline, a regular practice? And pairing it up with things at home or at work that are regular kind of habits. Like if you go to the break room and you're getting the coffee to brew, could you pair that up with one of these positions, one of these movements? When you're brushing your teeth at home, is there something you could be doing or something of that nature? Okay, so we have worked on the opening up the front of the hips, the outside of the pelvis, truing up the spokes, if you will. But when we're standing for prolonged periods of time, the hamstrings, those thigh muscles, will have a tendency to seize up. And then they'll do the same thing when we're sitting. When the knee is bent, those muscles will shorten up around the back of the knee. So let's try and just see what it's like to load into the back of the thighs and the back of the leg. I'm going to take my left leg, putting it up on that footstool once more. And I've got the chair, the seat back of the chair is right off to my right-hand side, so I can have my right hand holding here. Because the nice thing is, by having my hand resting on something, my subconscious, my brain is going, well, I've got 3 points of contact. I have a tripod. I've got my hand resting on the chair, my foot resting on the footstool, and the other leg is standing on the ground. So that tripod is sending a message from my brain to the rest of my body going, you know what, we're pretty secure. We're pretty well balanced. We've got these 3 points. We could relax into this a little bit. So by having my hand there, it's really, really important. My other hand, meanwhile, it's going to reach forward and across to the right as my hips travel back and to the left. So with my left leg elevated, right leg standing, my left hand is going to reach forward and across to the right. And then I'm just going to come back up out of here. As I do that, I'm going to encourage the foot that's on the bar stool or on the footstool to be pulled upward so that it encourages my knee to stay extended. And I'm just going to move my hips away and just allow my hand to reach across. There's a couple ways we can do this. One is by not moving my hips and just leaning over and reaching. We're not looking for that. Another one is pushing my hips back and really reaching as far as I can. And I'm not looking for that. All I'm looking for is, can I push my hips back behind me and to the left and allow this hand to act to kind of help balance me out so that I'm not going to lose my balance. And by doing that, you're probably feeling a tremendous amount of stimulation on the back of that thigh. I'm just going to switch over to the other side now. Right leg is up. Heel is pressing into that footstool. I'm feeling the weight of that leg, pulling the toe up to encourage that leg to extend. And I'm pushing my hips back and to the right. And I'm just going to reach a little bit with this hand to help me balance out. And then I'm going to come back up again. And come back up. Now, if you feel this in your lower back, it could be that you forgot to move your hips back and you're just loading into your lower back by leaning over without the help of your hips. So push your hips back. In fact, don't even worry about reaching with the hand to start out with if that's the case. Just push the hips back and come back up again. And now after that, walk around, see what that's like. We've got two more movements I'd like to discuss, but before that, just after you're walking around, go ahead and stand once again and check in with your foot pressure. And remember, we're not looking for perfect balance or anything. In fact, if you feel like when we started and you were more over one leg than the other, this is what your brain says is balanced. So if we were to do something where you came into this position, your brain is not accustomed to this new space, and therefore your brain will say, this doesn't feel right. I don't feel balanced. This is something new. So this was normal, and now this is your new normal, and your brain may have to take a little bit of time getting used to that. Okay. All right, you checked in with your foot pressure. Maybe there's some change. Hopefully there's a little bit of that. I'm going to use this wall right here for my next kind of, I'll call it a strength training action. And if you've ever played high school basketball or volleyball, you're probably familiar with this next movement. We call it the wall sit or the air chair. It goes by many names. And what we're going to be doing is you're going to be having your back and head against the wall while your feet are out in front. And you're going to slide down the wall enough so that you're almost in a seated position. We're going to try and focus our attention on the top of your thighs. These muscles are called your quadriceps. And they happen to be one of the largest postural muscles of the body. And when the foot is turned out, well, those muscles are twisted out of their rightful place. Or when the knee is kind of knock-kneed or bow-legged, the muscles are twisted out of their rightful place. So they may not be participating as much. And if these big muscles are not going to participate as much as they should, there may be some other muscles in that lower back that do. So we're going to have you lean against the wall. And you're going to walk your feet out. Now, if you're on a slippery floor, make sure that you've got some good grip or take your socks off, whatever you need to do so you don't slide down and smash into the ground. But I'm going to make sure that my feet are pointing directly ahead of me, straight ahead like railroad tracks. And they're only going to be maybe one shoe width apart. So if I had one of my shoes nearby, I could put that shoe in between both feet and it would be nestled right in between the left and the right. And what I'll do from this position is I'm going to slide down and you'll see my knees bend. And as they bend, they're going to go forward. And I want them to go forward so that they're right over my ankles. If my feet are too close to the wall, then I don't have the right angle. The pressure is going to be in my knees. I need to make sure that my feet are aligned and the ankles and the knees are about the same height off the ground. And I'm just going to sit here for a little while and wait for the bus to arrive, basically. If I've slid down enough, my lower back should be in contact with the wall. In fact, I can gently encourage that contact by engaging my abdominal muscles. And the pressure in your feet, go ahead and wiggle your toes so that you feel more pressure in the heels. Instantly, you'll begin to feel how much that makes these muscles work harder. Now, after a certain amount of time that you can tolerate, slide on up and walk around a little bit. Hopefully what you're feeling is a lightness of being. Heavy legs perhaps, but your lower back doesn't feel as compressed or compacted. You've woken up the big muscles to take away the work from the smaller muscles. It may feel pretty good. All right. Lastly, we're going to turn the camera a little bit this way because I've got these stall bars, this ladder that looks like it's up on a wall there. And I've got this inclined plane. Now, of course, you probably don't have one of these at home. So what are we going to do? Well, you could take a beach towel, a bath towel, fold it lengthwise, and then roll it up so it's a cylinder. We can use that. You might have a couple of books at home where you can put on the floor. But what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be using this to try to align our bodies. So I'm going to put this inclined plane right here so that I can put the balls of my feet up on the inclined plane. My heels may very well be off. And now a kitchen counter where the sink is would be a nice way of doing this. Or if you had a door that's open with doorknobs on either side, you could hold on to the doorknobs and position yourself right on the edge of the door. But you'll be putting the balls of your feet up on an elevated surface and holding on with both hands evenly. You're going to find yourself in this nice tall position. Your legs are going to be straight. And remember about these foam rollers that I brought out initially. While you're standing there in the heels, you're going to feel a heck of a calf stretch most likely. Remember that you want your body to be aligned so that we're reinforcing this nice position here so that your head is directly over the shoulders are over the hips are over the knees are over the ankles. Can you maintain this nice aligned position while going deep into your heels? And we'll hold this as just a strengthening exercise. We're actually strengthening the muscles within your hips to maintain the proper alignment. Of course, the calf muscles, they often kick in. Sometimes we consider it as a secondary stabilizer, where the calf muscles will work harder when we get off balance. So if you're feeling this as quite the calf stretch, it's probably because they're working a little bit harder than they need to. They don't complain as much as the lower back. But sometimes people with lower back problems will often have cramping at night when they go to bed in their calf muscles. And that's not, it's actually understandable because those calves are doing a lot of work to help that lower back that's overworked as well. So step down, go ahead and walk around and just get a sense of how that feels. All right. Now, I am going to just say that is it. I hope that you've experienced something really nice. If you want to reassess your foot pressure right now, or reassess how your hips tilted forward and backwards, rotated left to right, get a sense of how your body moves now. Did it change? How's your back? Is it different? Now, again, these are just movements based on human structure that the majority of people could probably benefit from, but there are always exceptions to the rules.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the RockFit Files. Every month we do a monthly meetup, and you can check it out on meetup.com. Look for movement-based education, and you'll find us there. Until next time, have a great week, and we'll see you soon.